From the 9th chapter of Acts, the first 9 verses. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As Saul neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. May God add his blessing to this reading of his word, the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Over the past several weeks, I've referred to Stephen's leadership in the early church as one of the 7 that had been selected to assist the leadership of the apostles, the disciples. Last week we looked at the ministry of Philip, another one of the 7, and the ministry that he first had in Samaria, and then on the desert road going from Jerusalem down through Gaza, where he had an evangelistic encounter with an Ethiopian government official. Stephen was martyred, and Philip left Jerusalem because a great persecution had broken out against the church at Jerusalem, largely because of one man, Saul. The first time we meet Saul was at the stoning of Stephen. The witnesses laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. Saul himself didn't throw any stones, but Saul was there, giving approval to Stephen's death. That's from the 7th chapter of Acts. This experience really must have lit a fire under Saul. It seemed to identify for him his life's calling. Although I'm sure that Saul thought, this certainly won't take long, snuffing out this strange movement. What a ragtag group of eclectic followers these people were. There were fishermen, there were tax collectors, there were prostitutes and other dregs of society. And so Saul decided to invest his energy into the extermination of the church. He was motivated to nip this in the bud. Saul was a learned, very educated man, a Jew, but he was also a Roman citizen. There were not many other persons around with his unique set of credentials. He was just the person to, with his heel, grind these losers into the dusty earth from which they had come. He was determined to put an end, once and for all, to this misguided worship of this uneducated carpenter from Nazareth. Saul was the type of person who was passionate about whatever he set his mind to. And he was good at what he did, whatever that might be. Passion will take a person a long way. People are drawn to passion even when it's misplaced. The world has known many passionate leaders, some good, some not good. Adolf Hitler immediately comes to mind. Few people have lived that were more passionate than that man. Remember Jim Jones and Jonestown? Jim Jones, for a while, actually pursued becoming a minister in the United Methodist Church, but he was declined candidacy because of psychological concerns. Without hesitation, after the stoning of Stephen, Saul rolled up his sleeves and went to work, becoming a one-man wrecking crew, breathing out those murderous threats against the early church. Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off men and women and put them in prison. I think it's significant that he put away men and women. He identified women followers of Jesus to be just as dangerous as the men. And this was at a point in history when women did not carry much influence in society. But already something different was going on within the life of the early church, the followers of Jesus. With the persecution, the church of Jerusalem quickly dispersed, largely because of Saul's efforts. And those who left Jerusalem nevertheless continued to preach about Jesus wherever they went. And so Saul made arrangements to chase after them and to track them down wherever they went. Saul had heard that a number of followers of Jesus had slithered off to Damascus, so that is where he intended to go. Saul wanted to do this all legal-like, and I think also he wanted it to be known by important people what he was doing. So he went to the high priest and asked for letters so that he could extradite these people back to Jerusalem. I think Saul wanted to make sure that the high priest knew that he was the driving force behind the arrest of all of these misguided followers of this Jesus. And when Saul came before the high priest, I'm sure that he laid it on pretty thick. He was good with words, as the world would find out in a few years' time. This was Saul's moment before the high priest. I believe that he had believed that he had been called to this task. Saul might have been thinking that this well could be a stepping stone to an important government position within the Holy Roman Empire. And so Saul embarked upon the 140-mile journey from Jerusalem to Damascus, Damascus in the north. Damascus is located north of the Sea of Galilee. The trip would have taken about a week. His excitement and anticipation, I think, must have grown with each passing day as he worked passionately to follow this newfound purpose for his life. He read and reread the paper in his hand that empowered him to do what he believed he had been called to do. And then, the absolute last thing that he ever imagined happening happened. On the road to Damascus, Saul had a come to Jesus meeting with none other than Jesus himself. Suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him, and he fell to the ground, and he heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Now, when a light from heaven flashes around you, that gets your attention. But then when a voice from heaven calls you by name, that really gets your attention, doesn't it? And when a light from heaven flashes around you and you hear a voice call your name, you tend to perk up. This is not some generic type of light from heaven, but a light that was accompanied by a voice that called out to Saul by name. And all Saul could manage was, "Who are you, Lord?" The answer came, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." Whoa. Back the truck up. That was a life changer. That was a plan changer. Nothing like this had ever happened to Saul before. Saul was not a person who was accustomed to being told what to do and where to go. And on top of this, something had happened to his eyesight. The light from heaven had blinded him. Saul went very quickly from being large and in charge to being as helpless as a baby. The men who were traveling with Saul led him by the hand. Isn't that pathetic? Led him by the hand into Damascus for 3 days. Now that's an attention-getting amount of time, isn't it? 3 days he was blind, and he did not eat or drink anything. Blind. And as far as we know, he didn't say a word for 3 days. Blind and speechless. Suffice it to say, Jesus had gotten Saul's attention. Saul could have lived 1,000,000 years, and he never would have seen this coming. And so for 3 days in the dark, Saul had the opportunity to take stock of his life and to run over and over in his mind his hearing that voice from heaven say, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Sometimes God acts in powerful ways like that. Other times, God is able to use sunrises or sunsets or rainbows or thunderstorms or tragedies, natural or man-made, or illnesses, or any number or type of significant or transformational occurrences to get our attention or to speak to us. Please do not hear me say that God sends tragedies or illnesses or mind-numbing shootings or bombings to get our attention. Some people will say that God acts that way. It's God's will. The shooting in Orlando, the shooting in Dallas, and now the most recent bombing in France. It's God's will. That is some person's very easy explanation for everything that happens. I can't say that. I won't say that. That's just too easy to say, I think. And I think it shows disrespect to the loving God that sent his son Jesus to show us just how much he loves us. What I am saying is that when such horrible things do happen, like fires in California or flooding in West Virginia or those shootings in Orlando and Dallas and the most recent bombings in Bangladesh and Turkey and Baghdad and now France. The list goes on and on. God is able somehow, some way to bring some good out of some horrible, tragic, bad, and evil. What I am saying is that when we encounter, figuratively speaking, our 3 days of blindness and silence, let's not be so quick to blame it all on God, but instead to take stock of where we are in our relationship with God and to ponder where we go from here. To be still and know that I am God would be a good start. If it was good enough for Saul, it ought to be good enough for each of us.